alien believed her weapon was a joke. She turned his course into target practice. Part 1. The Laughingstock of Docking Bay 9. The docking bay smelled like metal and something burnt. That was the first thing Yuna noticed when she stepped off the shuttle. The second thing she noticed was how quiet it got the moment people saw her uniform. Earth Defense Corps. 3 words stitched in gold on the left side of her chest. Simple. Clean. Most aliens in the bay had never seen one up close. They stared like she was some kind of museum exhibit that had wandered out of its case. Yuna was not tall. She was not especially large. She stood at about average human height, with short dark hair tucked behind her ears, and a posture that was straight without being stiff. She wore her standard-issue field uniform, gray-green with reinforced panels on the shoulders and knees. And on her right hip, holstered in a plain black casing, was her sidearm. Compact, quiet-looking, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Commander Tejo was already waiting at the end of the docking platform. He was older than her by about 15 years, with a face that had seen more diplomatic disasters than most soldiers ever survived. He gave her a nod that meant, "Good, you're on time," and then a second look that meant, "Brace yourself." She had worked with Tejo long enough to understand both. The Galactic Coalition station, officially called Relay Point Veron, was one of the largest neutral meeting grounds in the known systems. Ships from dozens of species docked here every cycle. Ambassadors talked, generals argued, scientists traded papers. It was the kind of place where everything looked civilized on the surface, and almost nothing actually was underneath. Today was the start of the annual diplomatic assembly. 3 days of meetings, demonstrations, and carefully organized social events meant to keep the coalition together. Earth had been a member for 11 years, long enough to be familiar, not long enough for most species to take them seriously. That was the problem Tejo had been managing for most of his career. He walked beside Yuna as they moved through the bay toward the main hall. Around them, alien delegations moved in clusters, some tall, some wide, some moving in ways that didn't seem to match how bodies were supposed to work. There were Vreth soldiers near the far wall. Yuna spotted them immediately, hard to miss. The Vreth were crustacean in build, layered natural armor over a wide, heavy frame, with 4 upper limbs and 2 large compound eyes that sat above a set of clicking mandibles. They stood about 7 feet tall, on average. The one in the center of the group was taller. That was Kale. His name had been in the briefing files Tejo had sent her 3 days before departure. Vreth Ambassador Commander. A rank that combined political authority with military seniority, which was how the Vreth preferred to operate. He had fought in 2 border conflicts, won both, and spent the last several years making sure every species in the coalition knew he had won both. He was respected, feared, and deeply convinced that size was the only honest measure of anything. He looked at Yuna the way someone looks at something they don't quite understand, and have already decided isn't worth understanding. The formal inspection was a coalition tradition. Each delegation walked a short line through the main hall entrance, while a presiding officer logged their credentials and reviewed their carried equipment. It was mostly ceremonial. Nobody expected anything to come of it. Kale's delegation reached the inspection point just as Yuna and Tejo arrived at theirs. The presiding officer, a thin, pale Duri with 6 fingers on each hand, scanned Tejo's credentials first, then moved to Yuna. That was when Kale looked over. His compound eyes moved across her slowly. The armor, the uniform, the holster. He stared at the pistol for a long moment. Then the clicking started, low at first, then building, until the sound came out of him in a sharp rattling burst that the translator units in the room identified as laughter. His entire delegation joined in. The sound was loud and strange, and cut through the general noise of the bay, like something had gone wrong with the ventilation. Other delegations looked over. Some moved closer to see what was happening. The translator bead in Yuna's ear caught the words half a second after they left his mandibles. "That is a human weapon?" He was not asking. He was announcing. His voice was designed for rooms like this, large, carrying, built to be heard. "It is smaller than a Vreth hatchling's first training tool." More clicking from his delegation. Does the coalition now allow children to attend its assemblies? A few non-human observers made sounds that their translators identified as amusement. Not many, but enough. Taeho's jaw tightened. Yuna could see it from the corner of her eye. He was running the calculation. How much to respond, how much to let go, what the cost was either way. Diplomacy was mostly math. He had told her that once. You were always adding and subtracting damage. Yuna didn't look at Taeho, she looked at Kale. She didn't say anything. She didn't reach for the weapon. She didn't change her expression by very much. She just looked at him, the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved, but haven't bothered to explain yet. Kale held her gaze for a moment with his compound eyes. Then he made another short clicking sound, dismissive this time, and turned back to his delegation. Taeho exhaled slowly. He leaned slightly toward Yuna and spoke under his breath. "Don't." "I wasn't going to," she said. "You had a look. I always have a look." He didn't argue with that. They finished the inspection and moved through into the main hall. The hall was wide and high-ceilinged, designed to accommodate species of varying heights and atmospheric preferences. Banners from Coalition member worlds hung in rows along the upper walls. Earth's was near the middle, blue and white, modest in size compared to some of the others. Yuna found her assigned quarters on the station's third residential tier. Small room, functional. A window that looked out on the external docking ring where ships came and went in slow, silent patterns. She set her bag down on the bunk and unholstered the pistol. She held it for a moment, just the weight of it in her hand, familiar and easy. 3 years she had carried this model. She knew every part of it without looking. It was not a large weapon. Kale was not wrong about that. But Kale had never seen what it could do. She set it on the small table beside the bunk and sat down. Through the window, one of the Vreth ships was still docked at the far ring, enormous, plated in dark composite armor, built like its crew, heavy and wide, and meant to make a point just by existing. Yuna looked at it for a while. Then she picked up her comm and sent a short message to Junho back on the harangue. "Run a full diagnostic on the rail assembly. I want clean numbers before the invitational." She set the comm down and looked back out the window. 3 days. She had 3 days before anything happened. She wasn't worried. The harangue was docked 2 levels below the main station ring, on a smaller berth reserved for escort-class ships. She was not a large vessel by any standard, about 60 meters from nose to engine housing, with a hull that had been repaired in enough places to tell a story if you knew how to read metal. She had served in 3 active deployments and 2 diplomatic escorts before being reassigned to Taeho's team. She was not pretty. She worked. Yuna walked her access corridor the next morning, while most of the station was still in its quiet cycle. The lights were on half power in the lower berths. Her boots made a steady sound on the grating. Junho was already in the workshop bay when she arrived. He was sitting on a low stool with the diagnostic unit open on the table in front of him, a stylus in one hand and a cold cup of something that had been tea several hours ago, sitting forgotten near his elbow. He was younger than Yuna by 4 years, with a careful face and hands that were always slightly stained from whatever he had been working on last. He was the best weapons engineer she had worked with. He was also, in her experience, the only person who got more focused the quieter the room became. He looked up when she came in. "Numbers are clean," he said. "Better than clean, actually." She pulled a second stool to the table and sat across from him. He slid the diagnostic display toward her. She read through it without rushing. The rail pistol was a standard Earth Defense Corps sidearm, model designation RX-7, though nobody called it that. People who carried it called it a rail or just the pistol. It fired a tungsten slug 3 millimeters in diameter and weighing approximately 3 grams. The rail mechanism accelerated it electromagnetically. The exit velocity was 4,200 meters per second. That number did not look impressive written down. Numbers rarely did. Context was what made numbers mean something. A standard Vreth infantry weapon, their main battle arm, the kind their soldiers carried in open combat, fired a compressed plasma bolt at roughly 900 meters per second. It hit hard, it burned on contact, it left large damage. By every visible measure, it was a more powerful weapon than a small metal pistol. What it could not do was what the pistol could. "Walk me through the slug penetration again," Yuna said. Junho tapped the display and brought up the material comparison chart. Against standard Vreth natural armor. Outer shell composite. Average thickness of the torso plating. The plasma bolt from their own infantry weapon does surface damage. Burns the outer layer, sometimes cracks it, but the inner structure absorbs most of the energy. That's why they fight the way they do. Close range, overwhelming force. They built their tactics around the fact that most weapons can't punch through them at a distance. He tapped again. A second line appeared on the chart. The rail slug at that velocity doesn't burn. It doesn't spread. It's a 3-gram tungsten rod moving at over 4 kilometers per second. It doesn't care about surface hardness. It punches through the outer plating before the shell material has time to distribute the impact load. The energy transfer is localized, deep. Penetrating armor that way isn't about how much fire you put on it. It's about speed and focus. And the tracking systems on their point defense arrays? Junho leaned back slightly. Their point defense is set up to track energy signatures: plasma, photon, charged particle. The rail slug has no energy signature when it's in flight. It's just a piece of metal. Fast metal, but metal. Their tracking systems don't register it until it's already past them. By the time a sensor picks up the impact, there's nothing left to intercept. Yuna nodded slowly. She had known most of this, but she liked hearing it laid out cleanly. It helped her organize things. "Why haven't they seen this before?" she asked. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to hear how Junho said it. He thought about it for a second. Because no other species miniaturized it. The rail technology itself isn't new. It's been used in ship-mounted weapons for a long time. Mass drivers, rail cannons, the Vreth know what those are. They've seen them on warships. But a ship-mounted rail cannon is 12 meters long and needs a dedicated power core. The idea of fitting the same basic physics into something you hold in one hand, it didn't occur to them as a serious direction. Their engineering philosophy is scale. If you want more power, you build bigger. We went the other way. "We ran out of space," Yuna said. "We ran out of space," Junho agreed. "Early ship design constraints. We couldn't fit large weapon systems on our first generation of hulls, so the engineers had to find ways to make small things hit harder. It started as a problem, then it became the design, then it became standard." He picked up the cold cup and realized it was cold and set it back down. "Kale's delegation has been talking about the Invitational," he said. "Rena intercepted some of their open-channel comm traffic. Kale submitted your name for the open challenge himself. He thinks it'll be funny." Yuna looked at the pistol sitting on the diagnostic tray. Clean, tested, ready. "When did the registration go through?" "Yesterday evening, after the inspection." She had expected something like this. Maybe not this specifically, but something. Kale was not the kind of figure who let an opportunity for public demonstration pass. He had an audience here and a point to make. Putting a human with a small pistol in front of a crowd on a marksmanship course was exactly the kind of theater he enjoyed. She reached over and picked up the pistol. It sat in her hand the way it always did. Light, solid, balanced. She checked the chamber out of habit. Empty, as it should be in the workshop. Pull the course schematics when they post them, she said. I want to go over every target arc and movement pattern with Rena before the event. Already asked her, Juno said. She said she'll have a full map ready by tomorrow morning. Movement timing, arc velocity, projected positions at every interval. Yuna set the pistol back down. Good. She stood and stretched her neck once to the left, once to the right. Through the small porthole in the workshop wall, the station's external ring was visible. Ships moving slowly in and out of berths, running lights blinking in quiet patterns. He really thought it was funny, Junho said. He wasn't asking. He had seen the incident report Taeho filed with the ship's log. He thought it looked small, Yuna said. That's different from funny. Funny means you understand the joke. He didn't understand anything. He just saw something that didn't match what he expected a weapon to look like. Junho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What does a weapon look like? Yuna picked up her jacket from the back of the stool. Like it works, she said. She left the workshop and walked back up the corridor toward the station proper. The lights were coming up to full power now, as the station moved into its active cycle. Other crew members passed her in the hall. A few nods, a few quiet good mornings. She moved through them without hurrying. She had 2 days before the invitational. 2 days was enough time to know a course well enough that it stopped being a course and started being something else. She had a word for what it became after that. She had learned it from an old instructor at the academy, who had a habit of saying quiet things that took years to understand. The word was geometry. Everything at distance was geometry. The target moved along a line. The line had a speed. The speed had a pattern. The pattern could be known. And once something could be known, it could be solved. Kale thought he had signed her up for embarrassment. She was already thinking about angles. Alien believed her weapon was a joke. She turned his course into target practice. H2, Part 3, The Course. Herr H. The reception dinner on the second evening was held in the station's main banquet hall, a wide room with high ceilings and long tables arranged to fit delegations of varying sizes. The lighting was soft and adjustable, tuned to a frequency that most species in attendance could tolerate without discomfort. It smelled like 3 different kinds of food that had nothing to do with each other, all happening at the same time in the same room. Yuna sat at the Earth delegation table with Taeho and 2 other officers. She ate without much interest in what she was eating, and listened to the general noise of the room. Around her, alien delegates talked and moved and made sounds that the translation systems converted into comprehensible speech with varying degrees of accuracy. Across the room, Kale sat at the center of the Vreth table. He was large, even among his own delegation. He talked loudly, and ate in the way that species with mandibles eat, with a precision that looked violent if you weren't used to it. At some point during the second course, he turned and found Yuna across the room. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood. The room didn't go fully quiet, but it shifted. The way a room shifts when something is about to happen that people want to watch. He spoke. The translator bead caught it cleanly. I have made an arrangement with the Coalition Events Committee, he said, loud enough to carry to several nearby tables. The human representative and I will both participate in tomorrow's open marksmanship challenge. He paused for effect. I felt it was important that our coalition allies have the chance to demonstrate the full capability of their equipment. The clicking laughter came from his delegation again. A few other tables made appreciative sounds. Someone at a far table made a remark that got partially swallowed by the background noise, but the tone of it was clear. Taeho put his fork down. He stood and cleared his throat with the practiced calm of a man who had been managing crises in public for a long time. The Earth Defense Corps appreciates the invitation, he said. His voice was even. His face was even. He was carrying the whole thing on his evenness, like a man balancing a glass of water on his head. Lieutenant Yuna is an accomplished markswoman. We look forward to the event." He sat back down. Under the table, Yuna could see his hand was flat against his leg, a habit he had when he was working hard not to say what he was actually thinking. She leaned slightly toward him. "I told you. I'm fine. I filed a protest this afternoon," he said quietly. Coalition Events Committee rejected it. They said it was a voluntary open challenge, and any registered delegate could enter. It is a voluntary open challenge. You don't have to do it. I know. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his plate and picked up his fork again. "I want Rena's full course map on my terminal by midnight." "Already done," Yuna said. "She finished it an hour ago." He set his fork back down and looked at her again, this time with a slightly different expression. "You already looked at it," he said. "I've been looking at it since this morning." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "How does it look?" She picked up her drink. "Manageable." The Marksmanship Invitational was held in the station's demonstration arena, a large oval space on the station's 4th level, built for exactly this kind of event. The floor was clear and flat. The target system was holographic. Projectors mounted in the ceiling and walls created 3-dimensional moving targets that responded to weapon fire using sensor panels embedded in the floor and walls. Hits were registered electronically. Scores were calculated and displayed on overhead screens. The course itself was designed by the Coalition Events Committee, with input from multiple species. It had been built to give every participant a fair test of their weaponry. In practice, that meant it had been designed around what most species considered a normal weapon. Targets were large, about the size of a Vreth torso. They moved on wide, slow arcs, rarely faster than a walking pace. The total course had 17 targets. Each one appeared in sequence, moved for a set duration, and then disappeared. A shooter had to hit each target before it cycled out. Missing a target meant a 0 for that position. The course was not subtle. It was built for plasma bolts and energy weapons, things that spread on impact and covered area. You didn't need to be precise. You needed to be fast enough and close enough to hit a large thing moving slowly. For most species, that was a fair test. Yuna had spent the previous night studying the course schematics with Rena. Rena was the harangue's tactical analyst, quiet, methodical, with a habit of thinking 3 steps ahead and then not saying anything until she was sure. She had mapped every target's movement arc with timing data, trajectory calculations, and projected positions at every half-second interval, from the moment of appearance to the moment of disappearance. She had also noted something that Yuna had already suspected. The course had a pattern. Not an obvious one, but a pattern. The targets didn't move randomly. Their arcs were predetermined and cycled in a fixed sequence. Once you knew the sequence, you could predict where each target would be at any point during its active window. Not just where it was, but where it was going to be in the next second, the next 2 seconds, the next 5. That information changed the problem completely. A shooter reacting to a target had to track, aim, fire, and adjust. They were always slightly behind where the target was, because human reaction time, any species reaction time, introduced a delay. The gap between seeing and doing. Predictive shooting removed the gap. You didn't aim at where the target was. You aimed at where the target was going to be when the slug arrived. You calculated the arc, factored in the travel time of the round, and fired ahead of the movement. Most species didn't train this way. Most weapons didn't require it. Their weapons moved fast enough and spread wide enough that a half-second delay didn't matter. A rail slug traveling at 4 kilometers per second had almost no travel time at arena distances. The calculation collapsed to almost nothing. The shot arrived nearly instantly. But the habit of prediction, of reading the geometry of a moving thing, and solving it before it happened. That was the skill. That was what Rena had given her the data for. And that was what the long hours of the previous night had been for. Yuna had not been memorizing target positions. She had been memorizing the logic of the course, the way it breathed, the rhythm of it. By morning, the course was not a test anymore. It was a known thing. The arena filled up about an hour before the event began. Delegations came in and found their observation sections. The seats were arranged in tiers around the oval floor, and the overhead screens showed the current standings display. A live leaderboard that would update in real time as each shooter completed their run. 6 species were competing in the open challenge. Their champions took warm-up positions along the side wall. The Vreth champion, a soldier named Gore, broad even by Vreth standards, was working through a series of deliberate practice swings with his plasma arm, each motion slow and controlled. He had a reach advantage that made the course look even easier for him than it was designed to be. Kale sat in the elevated observation box assigned to the Vreth delegation. He watched the floor with the calm patience of a person who already knew how the story ended. Tejo sat in the Earth section with 2 other officers. He looked like a man who had accepted the situation but had not made peace with it. Yuna stood at the competitor's side wall with her pistol holstered and her eyes on the course floor. The holographic projectors were running test cycles, brief flickers of target shapes appearing and disappearing in the space above the arena floor. She watched each one for its timing, where it appeared, how it moved, when it went out. She already knew all of it, but watching it again was different from knowing it. Watching it let the knowledge settle into her hands. Junho appeared at her shoulder. He had come down from the observation level. "Rena's in the upper section," he said. "She has the full timing sequence on her tablet in case you need a reference." "I won't need it." He nodded. "I know. She brought it anyway." Yuna looked at him. Then she almost smiled. "Tell her thank you." Junho went back to his seat. The arena continued to fill. The overhead screens switched from warm-up mode to competition display. The presiding officer for the event, a Duri official in a formal coat, took the center floor and began the opening announcement. The open challenge was about to begin. Kale leaned back in his observation box with all the ease of someone watching entertainment. Yuna rolled her neck once, slowly. H1, Alien believed her weapon was a joke. She turned his course into target practice. H1, Part 4, Target Practice. HR. The first shooter was a Dravik soldier, tall, thin-limbed, with a weapon that looked like it had been assembled from 3 different guns and then welded together. He stepped onto the floor and took his position with a kind of angular confidence that said he had done this before in places that mattered more than this. The course activated. The first target blinked into existence above the floor, a wide holographic shape moving in a slow left-to-right arc about 8 meters up. The Dravik raised his weapon, tracked the target for 2 full seconds, then fired. The shot was a wide blue burst that spread on contact and covered most of the target area. The sensor registered a hit. The crowd made approving sounds. He worked through the rest of the course the same way. Track, wait, fire. He was consistent and clean. He missed 2 targets out of 17, which was considered a strong performance for the open challenge. His final score appeared on the overhead display. It was good enough that the Dravik observers made a significant amount of noise. The second shooter was Gore. He walked onto the floor the way a wall moves when someone decides to relocate it. Wide, steady, unhurried. He carried his plasma arm at rest position. One of the lower limbs braced along the barrel. The weapon's housing settled into his natural grip like it had been made to sit there. It had, more or less. He stood at the line and did not appear to look at the course at all for the first few seconds. He just stood there. Then the course started, and he moved. What Gore did could not be called aiming in any familiar sense. He pointed the weapon at where a target was going to be before it arrived there, fired, and moved to the next. He did not track. He did not wait. He had looked at the course for a few seconds, and apparently extracted the pattern from it by some combination of experience and the kind of spatial instinct that came from having spent your whole life inside a body built for combat. 17 targets, 17 hits. He finished the course faster than the Dravik by almost 4 seconds. The arena was loud. The Vret section was extremely loud. Kale, in his observation box, made a satisfied sound that the translator rendered as something like, "There it is." Gore walked off the floor without expression. His score went to the top of the leaderboard by a significant margin. The next two competitors were solid, but not spectacular. Their scores placed them in the middle of the board. The crowd remained attentive, but the energy had settled into a waiting state. Most of the observers had decided that Gore's run was the peak of the event, and were watching the rest with polite patience. Then the presiding officer called Yuna's name. The way the room responded to that was interesting. It did not go quiet. It shifted. The kind of shift that happens when something appears that people have not fully decided how to feel about yet. Some sections of the crowd made sounds. The Vreth section made clicking sounds. Not hostile, anticipatory. The sound of an audience that had come to see a specific thing, and was now about to see it. Kale leaned forward in his box for the first time. Yuna stepped onto the floor. She was, by any visual measure, the smallest figure who had stood there during the event. Her weapon was holstered. She walked to the shooter's line, at the same pace she walked anywhere. Not slow, not performing anything, just moving from where she was to where she needed to be. She stopped at the line, unholstered the pistol, let it hang at her side. The course floor was 8 meters wide and about 20 meters long. The targets appeared in sequences across different heights and positions. She had looked at this floor 100 times in schematics and satellite view and timing charts. Now she was standing on it. She looked out across it once, just once. The presiding officer signaled the start. The first target appeared. She raised the pistol, pointed it slightly ahead of the target's current position, ahead of where it was, toward where it was going to be in the fraction of a second before the slug arrived, and fired. The sound the rail pistol made was not dramatic. It was a short, sharp crack, not much louder than a book dropped flat on a hard floor. No flash, no energy spread, just the crack, and then silence, and then the sensor panel registered a hit. First target, gone. She had already moved to the second position. Her eyes were on the space where the second target was going to appear in approximately 1.2 seconds. She had calculated 1.2 seconds the night before in Rena's map. She was not calculating it now. It was already in her hands. The second target appeared. She fired before most of the crowd had registered where the target was. Hit. Third target. Crack. Hit. Fourth. Crack. Hit. By the fourth shot the room had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of a crowd being patient. The sudden quiet of a crowd that has encountered something it did not expect, and has stopped making noise in order to understand it. The kind of quiet that happens when the thing in front of you doesn't match what you thought you were going to see, and your brain needs a moment to recalibrate. Yuna did not notice, or if she noticed, it didn't register as significant. She was on the fifth target. The fifth target moved on a diagonal arc, down and to the right, faster than the previous four. It was the first course position that had tripped up every previous shooter in some way. The Dravik had fired late, and caught only the edge. Even Gore had taken an extra half-second to track it. Yuna fired 1.3 seconds before the target completed its diagonal, and settled into the position her calculations said it would occupy at the moment of impact. Crack. Hit. Clean. Not the edge, center mass. The 6th through 10th targets were a sequence, appearing in fast rotation across 3 different heights, each one staying active for only about 2 seconds before cycling out. It was the section of the course designed to test sustained rate of fire. Most shooters lost at least one target here, because the sequence demanded quick transitions, and each transition required a fresh aim. Yuna had not thought of it as a sequence the night before. She had thought of it as a rhythm. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 had a rhythm, an interval spacing, a height pattern, a timing structure that once you heard it, did not stop being music just because you were on the floor instead of watching from above. She went through the sequence in what felt to her like normal time, but apparently did not look that way to the people watching. Crack, 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 crack. 5 hits, no pause between them long enough to notice, each shot landing before the previous sound had fully faded. The overhead display was updating in real time. Every position showed green. Perfect score, running through 10. In the Earth section, Tejo had stopped pretending to look calm. He was leaning forward, with both forearms on the railing in front of him, watching the floor with the focused stillness of someone who has wanted something for a long time, and is now watching it happen in front of him, and is afraid to move in case it stops. In the Vreth observation box, Kale's mandibles had gone still. His expression, insofar as a Vreth face expressed anything readable to a human, had shifted. The satisfied, waiting for the punchline quality that had been sitting on him since the inspection at Docking Bay 9 was gone. In its place was something else. Not quite alarm, not quite confusion, something between the two. The expression of a person encountering something they filed under a known category and are now realizing does not belong there. Yuna was on the 11th target. Crack, hit, hit. 13 through 15 were the farthest targets in the course, set at the back range of the arena, about 18 meters from the shooter's line. At that distance, the slow arc of the targets became almost imperceptible. They looked nearly stationary. For a weapon with spread, that was almost easier. For a weapon that fired a focused point, distance required an even more precise calculation, because any drift in the angle compounded across the distance. Yuna fired targets 13, 14, and 15 in under 3 seconds combined. 3 cracks, 3 hits. Back wall sensor panels lit up. The overhead display had never shown anything other than green since the course started. 16. Crack. Hit. 17 appeared, the final target. It moved on the most complex arc in the course, a figure-8 path that changed speed at the crossing point. It was the position designed to fail people. Shooters aimed at the middle, where the target slowed, and missed because the timing was off. Yuna aimed at a point 3 inches to the left of where the crossing happened, at the moment the target was 2/3 of the way through the first loop, and fired into a position the target would occupy, not at the crossing, but slightly before it, the moment of maximum predictability in the entire arc. Crack. The sensor lit green. The overhead display updated. 17 for 17. Course time, 41 seconds. A full 9 seconds faster than Gore's run, which had stood at the top of the board since the second shooter. The scoring system paused. It was not a dramatic pause. It was the pause of a machine that had received a set of inputs it was not sure how to process, because nobody had ever given it that particular combination before. It took the system about 3 seconds to complete the calculation and post the final score. In those 3 seconds, the arena was completely silent. Then the score posted, and then it was not silent anymore. H1. Alien believed her weapon was a joke. She turned his course into target practice. H2. Part 5. The lesson costs nothing. HR. The noise that came out of the arena in the moment after the score posted was not a single sound. It was several sounds happening at the same time, each one coming from a different part of the room, and together they made something that was not quite chaos, but was close to its edge. The Earth section was the loudest, in its own way. It was not the loudest by volume. The Dravik observers made sounds that physically vibrated the seating tier, but it had a quality to it. Tejo was on his feet. He did not shout. He did not clap in the fast, excited way someone claps when they are surprised. He brought his hands together slowly, deliberately, with a kind of weight behind each clap that said this was not surprise. This was recognition. This was something he had known was possible and had wanted to see confirmed in a room full of people who needed to see it. Other members of the Earth team joined him. Then a few observers from nearby delegation sections who had been watching and had made their own calculations about what they had just seen. Then, more. The Vreth section was quiet. Not the quiet of disinterest, the quiet of recalculation. A large group of people who had come in with a set of assumptions and were now, in real time, revising them. Some of them were talking quietly to each other in the rapid clicking exchanges that their translators rendered only partially. Some of them were looking at the overhead display. Some of them were looking at Kale. Kale was not looking at the display anymore. He was looking at Yuna. She had holstered the pistol the moment the 17th shot landed, before the score posted, before the crowd reacted, before any of it. The holster snapped closed with a small click that nobody heard over the noise. She stood at the shooter's line for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the competitor's side wall. She was not performing anything. She was not slowing down for the crowd or looking around at the reaction. She walked the same way she had walked onto the floor, like a person going from one place to another. Junho was waiting at the side wall with a water canteen. He held it out, and she took it and drank from it without ceremony. 41 seconds, he said. I know. 9 seconds ahead of Gore. I know. He was quiet for a second. He was not a person who made a lot of noise about things usually, but she could see from the way he was holding himself. Very straight, with the kind of controlled stillness people use when they are trying to contain something that wants to be bigger, that this was difficult for him. You good? She asked. He exhaled once, carefully. Yes, completely fine, totally normal morning. She almost laughed. It came out as something smaller than a laugh, but in the same general family. Rena appeared from the corridor behind the side wall. She had come down from the observation level fast enough that she was slightly out of breath, which for Rena was unusual. She was normally the calmest person in any room she entered. The scoring system flagged the run for review, she said, not because anything was wrong, because the course completion parameters didn't have a category for the time bracket you landed in. The presiding committee has to manually confirm the final placement. How long will that take? Yuna asked. They're doing it now. Should be confirmed within the hour. Yuna nodded. She drank more water and looked back at the arena floor. The event had continued. The last competitor, a Shorvani delegate, was completing their run on the course. The crowd had partially reset its attention to the floor, but not entirely. There were still sections of the observation tiers where people were talking about what had happened more than watching what was happening. The presiding officer posted the final confirmation 40 minutes later. Yuna's score stood first place overall, ahead of Gore by the widest margin in the Open Challenge's recorded history. The leaderboard updated with the official result and stayed that way. Kale came to find her afterward. She was in the corridor outside the arena, standing near a viewport that looked out on the station's middle ring. The post-event crowd was moving around her. Delegates heading to their next meetings, staff clearing equipment from the arena floor. The general organized movement of a station transitioning from one scheduled block to the next. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps. The Vreth moved more quietly than their size suggested. She heard the shift in the crowd around her, as people made space in the way crowds make space when something large is moving through them. She turned around. Kale stopped about 2 meters away. Up close, he was even larger than he registered from across a room. The compound eyes caught the corridor light and held it. His mandibles were in a neutral position. Not the aggressive forward angle of challenge, not the spread of communication. Just still. His delegation was behind him at a distance. They had stopped when he stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at her hip, at the holster where the rail pistol sat. "I would like to understand," he said. The translator caught the words cleanly, stripped of the particular clicking quality that carried tone in the Vreth language. But the intent came through regardless. It was not a demand. It was not an apology. It was close to something genuinely curious. Yuna reached down and unholstered the pistol. She held it out toward him, grip first. He looked at it. But he looked at it the way you look at something you previously dismissed and are now seeing for the first time. "The weapon is small," he said. "Yes," she said, "but it hits harder than most weapons 3 times its size." "At range, yes." A pause. His mandibles moved slightly. "How?" She turned the pistol, so the rail housing was visible along the barrel. "The barrel is a magnetic rail. 2 electromagnetic coils set inside the housing, here and here." She indicated the positions without pointing directly, just inclining the weapon slightly. "They accelerate a small slug, 3 grams of tungsten, to about 4,000 meters per second. The slug doesn't carry a charge. It doesn't spread on impact. It transfers all of its kinetic energy into a single point at the moment of contact. At that speed, the material it hits doesn't have time to distribute the force. It just," she paused for a word, "receives it." Vreth armor is designed to distribute impact load. Wide surface, layered structure. "I know." Another pause. His eyes moved between her face and the weapon. "And the ship targeting systems cannot intercept it." "No energy signature in flight," she said. "It registers as an impact, not an approach." He was quiet for a longer time now. The corridor moved around them. Neither of them looked away from the conversation. "This technology is not new," he said finally. It was not quite a question. "The physics isn't new," she agreed. "The miniaturization is. We worked on it for a long time. Our early ships had limited space for weapon systems. We couldn't scale up, so we went the other direction." Kale made a low sound that the translator did not render into words. Some sounds didn't translate. They just sat in the air and meant what they meant. "You went smaller," he said. "We ran out of room," she said. "So yes." He looked at the pistol one more time. Then he looked at her. Something in his posture had changed since the inspection at Docking Bay 9. It was not submission. The Vreth had no body language for submission that she would have recognized anyway. It was closer to a realignment, the posture of someone who has received new information and is incorporating it. He turned and walked back toward his delegation without another word. Yuna watched him go. She holstered the pistol and turned back to the viewport. Rena found her there a while later. "Committee confirmed the final standing," she said. "It's official in the record. Also, the Shorvani head of delegation asked Tejo for your service file. He said it was for their tactical review board." "What did Tejo say?" "He said it was restricted." And then he smiled in a way I think scared the Shorvani delegate a little. Ships moved in slow, distant patterns against the dark. Lights blinked. The station hummed around them, a steady old sound, like something that had been running for a long time and knew how to keep going. "What did you think?" Rena asked, "when you were out there?" Yuna thought about it honestly for a moment before she answered. "I was thinking about the geometry," she said. "The arc on the 15th target was slightly different from the schematic. It had a 2-degree drift toward the left. I adjusted mid-run." Rena nodded. "I noticed the variance when I reviewed the playback. I was going to flag it." "It wasn't a problem." "No," Rena agreed, "it wasn't." They stood there for a moment longer. The viewport showed the external ring clearly. The Vreth ship still docked at the far berth, enormous and armored, built to make a point by existing. It looked the same as it had before the event. It had not changed. But Yuna had noticed, when Kale turned to walk away from her, that he had not made the clicking sound, the one he had made at the inspection, the one his delegation had echoed, the one that the translator had identified as laughter. He had not made it. That was not nothing. Back on the Earth section, Tejo was finishing a communication with the Earth Defense Corps main command. He was telling them about the event results in the precise, careful language of a senior officer filing a positive report. But his voice had a particular quality in it, quiet, controlled, with something underneath it that had been there for years and was only now being allowed to sit in the open for a moment. He had spent 11 years in this coalition, managing the gap between what humanity was and what everyone else thought humanity was. 11 years of being patient, of choosing the right moment to say less, of carrying the weight of other people's assumptions about what small looked like and what it meant. Today the gap had closed by one small, specific, measured amount. It was not everything. It was not most things. 11 years of work did not reset because of 41 seconds on a marksmanship floor. But it was something. And in diplomacy, as in rail physics, something delivered to the right point at the right moment had a way of going deeper than anything built large had ever managed to reach. He finished his report, closed the comm, and looked out at the station through the observation window. Somewhere on the floor below, Yuna was probably already doing something practical. That was her way. She would not stand around thinking about what had just happened. She would be thinking about what came next, what needed to be done, what number needed to be clean before the next time something was asked of her. He had worked with people like that his whole career. Not many, but enough to know what they were worth. He sat back in his chair and let himself be, for exactly 1 quiet minute, simply proud. Then he picked up the next file and went back to work. End of Part 5. Story complete.